all of this is really only the beginning of what Russia and Putin want from Ukraine. The biggest thing they want of all is...
Oh my god. Imagine Chinese diplomacy if Russia became... That is what Russia genuinely believes. And there are historical reasons for this. I feel like this video is missing the easiest point for this argument. I don't understand how could the rest of this video be so well researched and they're missing this one simple point.
Stream and Nebula. Watch another brand new full-length companion video to this one in my ongoing Modern Conflict series that explains the entire course of the 2008 Russian invasion of Georgia, as well as the entire war so far between Russia and Ukraine since 2014 in the Donbass. All of which you can access by signing up for the Curiosity Stream Nebula bundle deal for less than $15 a year at curiositystream.com/RealLifeLore. Throughout the past few months, there has been almost constant news and coverage in the West about Russia's imminent plans to invade Ukraine.
Started large-scale military drills this morning.
And this is a very dangerous moment.
Stoking fears of an invasion.
More than 2,000 troops, according to American intelligence, sent within the 24 hours.
American citizens should leave now.
On the morning of February the 24th, these fears proved to be well-founded. Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, effectively declared war on Ukraine and authorized the Russian military to invade the country. Explosions were quickly reported afterwards across the country. And immediately prior to this declaration, the Russian army had amassed around 200,000 soldiers, along with their tanks, artillery, equipment, and field hospitals across their border, and many others inside of Belarus along their border with Ukraine. For comparison, this is nearly the same size as the entire Ukrainian military, and about the same number of troops sent by the United States when invading Iraq in 2003. This is certainly large enough to be an effective invasion force. Even further, the Russian government has recognized the independence of the two breakaway states inside of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk, and ordered Russian troops inside of both. When factoring in the Russian military presence already stationed in Crimea, you can quickly begin seeing that the Russians have Ukraine.
Go ahead. I have a dumb meme for you guys. Since we're talking about the, like Humber saying, trolls keep dropping the Azov battalion. If Russia is actually that concerned about the Azov battalion, why aren't they declaring war on the Sea of Azov? Think about that. Yeah, Russia got removed from SWIFT today.
Almost entirely surrounded. And now that war has broken out, it has the potential to unleash the most serious conflict seen in Europe since the Second World War. And the biggest question on everybody's mind this entire time has been this: what exactly does Vladimir Putin and Russia want with Ukraine? And the answer is, of course, it's complicated. The origins of what Putin wants today are rooted in what happened more than 3 decades ago, back in the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union first collapsed. For centuries before this event, whether as part of the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire, the modern countries we know of today as Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and others had all been a part of the same country, and their people had largely moved between all of them across generations. These places are all deeply and intimately connected by their
As a Polish person, I'm deeply offended by those borders, okay? just putting that out there. I'm not the borders, I mean. I'm deeply offended by those borders with the ongoing caption of those are the historical borders of the region. It's a bit more complicated than that. The African continent, and they have something to say about borders, yeah. Balkan War doesn't... yeah, people also keep saying that. They fucking forget the Balkan War, too. Hi, Owen QQ, how are you doing? Finland part of it, too, yeah. Yeah, anyways.
These places are all deeply and intimately connected by their shared history, and for decades, that history involved being widely recognized as one of the world's most dominant and formidable global superpowers. But all of that changed in late 1991, when, suddenly, the sweeping United Empire that had existed in some form or another for centuries collapsed, and left in its place 15 newly independent republics. Today, the largest of them, Russia, has only half of the population that the former United Soviet Union had, and she possesses an economy that's only moderately larger than Spain's, a country with only a third of the population that ceased being a great power back in the 18th century, At the same time, the massive amounts of territories that were once dominated from the central government in Moscow have been shrinking almost continuously ever since. During the Cold War, there were two rival competing military alliances on the European continent: the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, in the west, and the Warsaw Pact in the east. Moscow didn't outright rule the countries of the Warsaw Pact, but they were effectively locked into Moscow's orbit as thralls or puppet states. From Moscow's perspective,
Orbiters, man. Fucking cringe. I'm not fine, actually. What's going on QQ? Someone was saying that this historic border stock is bullshit because no country government has existed longer than 2 or 3 centuries. Yes. I like the way Chinchilla puts it. Chinchilla has this argument based on the fact we no longer are in an era of nation states. The blood and soil arguments are not relevant to today's geopolitics or even to today's sentiment of belonging to a state, unless you're literally some kind of far-right nut job. We're past that. We're past that. It's obsolete. So what? A lot of people from my friend from Kiev just play games right now. Yeah, I mean, nothing wrong with playing games. But yeah, let's watch the video. Yeah, having static borders is argued to contribute to peace. Okay.
these states provided a massive buffer against any potential military incursion from.
But we're still in the era of nation states. Depends. Well, it depends on the nations. Yeah. Okay. To be fair, I was being a bit too categorical. I accept you pushing back on that. But globalism directly contradicts traditional conceptions of how nations should function and define themselves. And it's an ongoing issue. I'm wrong to say that's resolved, and that the side of globalism is the dominant one. So you're right. It's not like the era is over, but we are in an era of transformation of what it means to be a nation. I think that's a more nuanced take.
Their primary Cold War rivals to the west in NATO. You see, from the Netherlands in the west to the Ural Mountains in the east, this whole part of Europe is dominated by a geographic feature called the North European Plain. Almost entirely flat, the plain is shaped like a funnel, with a very narrow width in northern Germany, but with a mouth that opens up increasingly wider as it approaches the Ural Mountains. As the open plain gets wider across the east,
it becomes
increasingly difficult to defend across its entire length. And as a result, from the perspective of any regime based in Moscow, regardless of the time period and regardless of the ideology, it is imperative to expand control westwards across as much of this open plain as possible in order to narrow the gap that they need to defend in the event of a conflict with the West. During the Cold War, the control of this plain by a regime in Moscow was at its greatest historical extent, and was exerted either outright or by proxy from the Urals all the way through East Germany. And the entire wider section of the funnel was firmly controlled by Moscow, with Austria and Finland remaining neutral and Yugoslavia a non-aligned communist state. The only fronts that Moscow at the time had to truly worry about against NATO were across the Sudetan Mountains, the Black Sea, and a narrow line across the North European plain in central Germany, all easily defensible positions. Any invasion of the Soviet world from the west across these geographic frontiers would have been incredibly difficult. But in the 30 years since 1991, the situation has changed dramatically against Moscow's favor. Today, the former Warsaw Pact territories of East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria are all a part of NATO, while the former Soviet republics themselves of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia all are as well. This reality has pushed the NATO front lines significantly further to the east, across the wider section of the North European plain, and has separated Russian territory between the mainland and the Kaliningrad exclave here, across what's known as the Suwalki Gap. If you're sitting in the Kremlin in Moscow and you still believe that NATO is a hostile military alliance, or could become one in the future, then this situation understandably looks pretty grim. But it's not totally lost yet. In the years following the breakup of the Soviet Union, many of the newly independent republics established and joined their own military alliance called the Collective Security Treaty Organization, or CSTO, which in Europe consists of Russia, Belarus, and Armenia, but not Ukraine, which has remained a sort of neutral zone between NATO in the west and the CSTO in the east. And now, within this lens, you can easily see why Ukraine is currently and always will be a geographic core interest to Moscow. If Ukraine...
Okay. I'm going to respond to chat a little bit. Je pose ma question en français, comme je vois que tu vis ici. C'est quel document qui est diffusé? Why is Russia invading Ukraine by RealLifeLore? Here, let me link it to you. So I had never really thought of the geographic argument, the whole Ural Plains argument, considering as it relates to troop movements and that kind of stuff. Neyman, that's all I've been talking about. No, you haven't been talking about. You have talked about it being a threat. I know we haven't actually had that discussion. Let's be real. But you haven't talked about this specific like geographic argument, or if you have, it wasn't when I was there. Yes, NATO getting closer, but what he's explaining is why NATO getting closer actually presents a supplemental tactical disadvantage to just having bases closer. That's all I'm saying, and I'd never heard this before. Our global order is not as global and strong as people make it out to be. Fair enough. We shouldn't be past national identity. Can't give that up to globalization, to be frank. I'm more like pro globalization. Not that I'm pro globalization. I'm pro like a humanitarian. No, not humanitarian. Humanistic perspective. Like we should all join together and sing Kumbaya. Yes, this represents a regression of international norms. It's just that within the international community, your people living in another country is not a reason for war. And when nation states came to be, that was the aim. So we still got nation states like relics of the past, at least for most countries. Not only oil is at stake, but also water. That's true. That should be obvious. Didn't think I needed to say that. Okay.
Ukraine is within Moscow's orbit.
I wanted to say something else, but I forgot it. Anyways, let's watch.
Then it pushes the CSTO's and Moscow's defensive lines to the Carpathian Mountains in the southwest, and it narrows their exposure across the North European plain to only the eastern border of Poland. And while the Baltic states do lie across the plain as well, CSTO forces could easily encircle them by rapidly advancing across the narrow Suwalki gap between Kaliningrad and Belarus, and cut them off from the rest of NATO, meaning that they aren't as grave of a geographical threat. Conversely, however, if Ukraine became a NATO member state, it would surge the NATO front lines far beyond the Carpathian Mountains and far across the wider section of the North European plain, and place the new defensible front line across nearly 2,300 kilometers of open, hard-to-defend, flat land, the easternmost section of which would only be a little more than 300 kilometers away from Volgograd, which, if taken, would shut down the entire Volga River and cut off Russia's valuable oil and gas resources coming up from around the Caspian Sea from the rest of the country, as nearly happened during the Second World War, back when the city was better known as Stalingrad. Even further, Belarus, a friendly and loyal CSTO state that is often considered a mere extension of Moscow itself,
that was Nazi Germany's strategy,
become an indefensible salient protruding deep into the NATO front lines, surrounded entirely.
At least this dude thinks Kaliningrad is important. That's yeah, got you there, Chow.
Control by Moscow, or at least neutrality, is essential to the defense of the CSTO and Russia, if you believe that NATO is a hostile aggressor or could become one in the future. But all of this is really only the beginning of what Russia and Putin want from Ukraine. The biggest thing they want of all is energy. While their overall economy is little larger than Spain's, Russia remains a global superpower through the lens of energy resources, and it's specifically oil and gas that is the most critical component to understand about Russia's world.
How does Russia think that losing that hard-to-defend border is going to affect them? He just said it. He just explained it. It doesn't make sense to you because, and I agree with you, NATO is not an offensive pact. NATO sharing that the Ukrainian border with Russia, NATO is not going to come up and be like, yeah, let's invade Russia. I don't buy that argument. But that is what Russia thinks. That is what Russia genuinely believes, and there are historical reasons for this. NATO is historically an anti-Russian pact. Even though on paper it's a defensive pact, it's historically an anti-Russian pact. And that has been proved time and time again. Who is to say the defensiveness won't change? That's an argument. I think you could also go the other way around and accept NATO encroachment and perhaps push harder for joining NATO and then just being part of the defense pact. Well, that's we would kind of need to rewind like 20 years to go that strategic route or diplomatic route. Bridges have been burned since then, or at least would need a lot of work to be rebuilt. But yes, that is something you can say. I struggle to see like what kind of political climate it would take for NATO to be an aggressor on Russia of all countries. But yes, that's possible. I'm biased against Russia for obvious reasons, and I see this just as an excuse, and they're actually just molding that they're losing countries that they can bully around. There is a bit of that too. I mean, that is also why all of this happened after the coup in Ukraine. Yes, Russia tried to join NATO, and NATO said no, absolutely. But I'm saying Russia tried to join NATO, and NATO said no, and that was it. Like when Russia did it, it was almost Russia didn't like try to join NATO, and then was like, well, what do I have to do to join NATO? Do I have to change things? Do I have to show good faith, etc., etc.? Or like, oh, you said no, now I'm going to be mad for the next 50 years. If Russia joined NATO, do you know which country will find aggression? China. That's actually true. That's a big true. China would not be happy. Oh my god. Yeah, imagine Chinese diplomacy if Russia became a NATO member. And Mongolia. Yes. We got our resident Mongolian chill with Chinchilla. If Russia was in NATO, NATO would be almost pointless, though, until China gets a little bit more aggressive. Oh, this is a hypothetical scenario where Russia takes the path of conforming more to Western standards of diplomacy and government, because that is basically what Russia joining NATO would entail as well. I don't think. Even if Putin was favorable to, was a favorable autocrat to NATO interests, I don't think NATO. I don't know if there's a clause for that in NATO or not, but I would struggle to imagine NATO accepting an alliance with Russia without at least a proper theater of a democracy. At least put up a good show of it. It doesn't have to be a real democracy, but it's got to at least be pretty convincing theater. Some will argue that we need Russia against China, and that China is the greater threat to the international order. Depends on what you mean by international order. At the same time, something that I've seen people say, like China's gonna ally with Russia. China's gonna like be very interested in going to war with NATO if push comes to shove. I think China has a lot more to lose, and in virtue of that, they're going to act much more, how to put it, much more safely. They're going to be much less belligerent, rather, is what I'm trying to say. I also feel that the argument saying that having a NATO member at its border would be a major threat. But since the British have Baltic countries... Oh, since Russia has Baltic countries close to St. Petersburg, it's a fake argument, and nowadays ballistic missiles are also able to cross thousands of kilometers. If NATO was an aggressive force, they could launch them from Baltics or Poland. So there is a difference between ballistic missiles and ground troops. Ballistic missiles are useful in blowing shit up. Troops are what actually wins the war. Troops are what actually... gains ground, would actually take strategic objectives. That is why what this guy is saying in this video is very well reasoned. Why he's talking about how easy it is to move troops across certain borders or not, because that, even though we have drones, even though we have ballistic missiles, etc., etc., the war still needs feet on the ground. We are not past that reality, and we won't be for a long time, hopefully. Breaking news: NATO joins the Union State of Russia and Belarus. Yeah. The ghost of Kiev was fake, from what I heard. Yeah, probably. For the U.S., NATO exists to limit Russian influence. Why would they let Russia join? if Russia became an ally, you don't... Okay, yes, historically the NATO exists to limit Russian influence. If Russia's influence aligns with Western interests, there is no reason to limit its influence. I know this is pure speculation. I know we're very far from that, and I know this is not what's going to happen for at least decades, if at all. But you don't maintain an arbitrary pact against an enemy who's just not an enemy. There was discussion of that in the 90s. Multiple NATO members, multiple politicians across NATO member states are arguing, what is the point of NATO now? Russia is now a free country, a democracy that no longer threatens Western interests. And yet, we chose to I don't want to put it in like we chose or they chose. I don't know necessarily who started it. There's a bit of he said she said with the stuff, but there's the Spiegel article we read yesterday was very, very interesting concerning concerning how it portrayed the display from the fall of the USSR. Basically it describes some of the events that happened to resurrect Russia as an enemy of the West. And to be entirely fair, I do feel like some actions taken by Western powers were callous and at least partly the cause of the current situation back then. We have done that with Cuba for a long time. Yes. That is why I'm really, really strongly in support, for example, of Obama's when Obama started dismantling the Cuba embargo stuff and all and so on and so forth. All that stuff's very problematic. Anyways, back to the video. Bro, let's watch some Zelensky films.
Worldwide ambitions. Across multiple vast oil fields, Russia is the world's second largest producer of oil, ahead of even Saudi Arabia. While at the same time, Russia also possesses the world's largest proven reserves of natural gas, largely across Siberia, which has enabled Russia to become the world's leading exporter of natural gas. The revenues gained from the sale of all these oil and gas exports are the literal foundation for the modern Russian state and Russian power, because they provide as much as 50% of the entire Russian government's budget and represent about 30% of Russia's entire GDP. Russia has used the vast money earned from selling oil and gas abroad to fund their military, pay off debts, save cash, and finance its own restoration as a global great power. Russia is therefore effectively a petrostate, just like Saudi Arabia or Iran, and is the only petrostate located in Europe, at least for now. For you see, despite these massive geological blessings, they also come with a number of geographical catches from Moscow's perspective. Most of their gas is sold off to the hungry customers in the European Union, so much so that 35% of the EU's entire gas supply comes from Russia alone, including Germany, the world's fourth largest economy, who imports nearly half of their natural gas from Russia. This flow of gas towards Germany and Europe across this complex system of pipelines provides critical revenues for the Russian government to function and provides critical heat for European cities during the winter. And so both sides heavily rely upon the other here. Any disruption in this trade relationship would be disastrous from Moscow's perspective, and Ukraine is the most likely place for such a disruption to happen in the future. Back during the Soviet times, when Russia and Ukraine were both one country, pipelines were built across Ukraine almost like a bridge that transported gas directly from the Siberian sources to the customers in Europe. But then, all of a sudden, after the USSR's collapse, Ukraine was an independent country who's demanding tariffs to the tune of billions of dollars a year from Russia in order to continue using their country as a gas bridge to Europe. And Russia had no other choice but to agree, because the pipeline infrastructure anywhere else didn't yet exist. As late as 2005, 80% of Russia's gas exports heading to Europe were still flowing across pipelines through Ukraine. But in the decades since, Russia has sought to solve this over-reliance on Ukraine by building multiple new pipelines that avoid Ukraine entirely, like Yamal Europe across loyal Belarus, Nord Stream 1 and 2 beneath the Baltic that go directly from Russia to Germany, Moscow's largest single customer, along with South Stream, Blue Stream, and Turk Stream beneath the Black Sea. By 2024, Russia has plans to completely cease all of their gas exports through Ukraine entirely, and the government will save billions of dollars in tariffs as a result. But that is hardly what has been so threatening about Ukraine recently. Significantly more menacing to the perspective of Moscow was the discovery, for the first time in early 2012, that Ukraine's exclusive economic zone within the Black Sea may contain more than 2 trillion cubic meters worth of natural gas.
Oh, I didn't know about this.
Largely concentrated around the Crimean Peninsula. To make matters even more interesting, further technological advancements in the early 2010s that enabled the successful drilling of natural gas and oil from shale rock unlocked the potential shale gas hotspots for Ukraine around Donetsk and Kharkiv in the east and around the Carpathians in the west. Beginning in
I did know about the shale gas deposits. I did not know about the Crimean underwater gas. That's interesting.
2012, there was suddenly a very real possibility that almost out of nowhere, Ukraine had the world's 14th largest reserves of natural gas, just behind Australia and Iraq. But as a relatively poor country, Ukraine lacked the finances, the technology, or the equipment to successfully harvest any of these resources in any large quantities.
Infrastructure's a bitch.
But that all changed when, shortly afterwards, the Ukrainian government began granting exploration and drilling rights to the likes of Shell and Exxon. It was suddenly possible that within a few years, these Western companies would enable Ukraine to transform into Europe's second petrostate, which would have not only been a direct and serious competitor to Russia's own gas supply to the European Union, and thus at the same time a major threat to the Russian government's budget and GDP, but would have also provided the easy path of eventual Ukrainian admission into the European Union and NATO as well. And this is what's really, in my opinion, what this whole situation is truly about. In 2012, at the time when these discoveries were initially made, the man in charge of Ukraine was Viktor Yanukovych, a pro-Russian politician who was keeping Ukraine more politically aligned with the interests of Moscow. So long as he was president, these discoveries were not directly threatening to Russia. But when suddenly in February 2014, his government was toppled in a pro-EU and pro-Western revolution in Kiev, Moscow was very quick to take the opportunity to invade some of Ukraine, seize the Crimean Peninsula, and annex it in the name of historical claims and protecting ethnic Russians. But by seizing Crimea, the Russians also took direct control of 2/3 of Ukraine's coastline and, by extension, the vast majority of Ukraine's maritime exclusive economic zone. And, most critically, an estimated 80% of Ukraine's potential offshore oil and gas reserves. In addition, billions of dollars worth of drilling equipment and other assets in the peninsula were seized by the Russians, all of which completely crippled the Ukrainian government's future potential.
Okay, this is fascinating. No one talked about this. I don't remember. Admittedly I wasn't as informed back then and necessarily paying attention. But even now, no one's talking about this.
To challenge Russia's gas supremacy in Europe. To make matters even worse, from Ukraine's perspective, the areas of Ukraine that are the most rich in shale gas are located very near to the most major conflict zones encouraged and funded from Moscow, with the Donetsk and Luhansk rebellions here and the Transnistria breakaway republic in Moldova over here, which, in my view, is not a coincidence. As a result, Shell and Exxon both backed out from all of their contracts with the Ukrainian government shortly afterwards, leaving Ukraine with no capability to extract the remaining resources themselves, and no capability to challenge Russia's occupation of Crimea. From the perspective of Putin and his regime, these were all mandatory actions to take in order to curb a Western-oriented Ukraine from ever selling major supplies of gas to Europe that would threaten his own regime's primary source of wealth and power. Ukraine had to be dismembered to protect himself and the other oligarchs who are in power. But there's more. Under Putin, Russia can't ever give Crimea back to Ukraine because it would surrender the entire exclusive economic zone and all of the gas resources within it back, along with the strategic port city of Sevastopol, one of the very few year-round ice-free ports that the Russian Navy can use and needs to operate throughout the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. If Crimea was ever returned to Ukraine and Ukraine joined NATO, they would regain their ability to threaten the Russian government's primary source of revenue, and the Russian Navy's most geostrategically valuable port would be lost forever. But Ukraine has some pressure that it can and has been applying itself. Naturally speaking, the geography of Crimea is that it's almost an island, only loosely connected to the rest of Europe and covered by dry and arid steppes and some salty marshes with very little fresh water for people or agriculture. Prior to the Russian invasion and annexation, the vast majority of Crimea's freshwater supply, like 85% of it, came down into the peninsula from a canal built during the Soviet era that diverted water from the Dnieper River. But after the Russians took it over in 2014, the Ukrainians weren't exactly in the mood to continue sending down the water, and they filled up the canal within their remaining borders to the north with cement and blocked the flow of all this water down into the now Russian-occupied Crimea. As a result, Crimea has ever since been essentially dying a death from 1,000 cuts, as it steadily recedes back into the dry and arid steppe of history, while modern climate change is only making everything even worse, as 2020 was the driest year ever on record in Crimea since record-keeping began 150 years ago. As a result, the Russian government is struggling to maintain its hold. The capital city Simferopol's reservoir is today less than 7% full, and the city has been having to ration water supplies, even after the Russians built a nearly $4 billion bridge across the Kerch Strait here to connect the peninsula over to the Russian mainland. Shipping in water is difficult, and life for the more than 2 million people on the peninsula is getting harder after the annexation, not better. The Russian government is having to spend billions of dollars a year to financially prop up Crimea, and it's largely all because of this canal being shut down by the Ukrainians over on the other side. And Ukraine is obviously not in any kind of mood to open it back up again. As a result, the current crisis in Ukraine can also be seen through the lens of climate and water conflict, and it's one of the biggest reasons why Russia is doing what it's doing now. The current Prime Minister of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, has stated on multiple occasions that the primary goal going forward for the Ukrainian nation is the reclamation of the Crimean Peninsula from Russia. Currently, Ukraine has no realistic capability to challenge the overwhelmingly more powerful and capable Russian military. But in the future, were Ukraine to join NATO and a murky conflict breaks out between themselves and Russia over Crimea, or in the eastern rebel-occupied Donbass where it may be unclear who started it, it's hypothetical that Ukraine could trigger Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which states that, quote, if a NATO ally is the victim of an armed attack, each and every other member of the alliance will consider this act of violence as an armed attack against all members and will take the actions it deems necessary to assist the ally attacked.
So this is something I've been doing I've been saying for weeks. Ukraine could not have joined NATO as long as there was an ongoing territorial dispute, whether it was Crimea or Donbass. And NATO has a policy not to take in countries that have territorial disputes exactly because of what this video is explaining right now. Not to not be dragged into a murky situation, into wars.
Therefore, in the future, the fear of those in power in the Kremlin is that Ukraine will bring in the rest of NATO to fight Russia in taking back Crimea, and that is a war that Moscow knows it will lose. Not only because of NATO's much more advanced military capabilities, but because of Russia's own internal demographic problems. Ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia's deaths have exceeded her births, while the nation's fertility rate has been among the lowest in the world. And so the country's population has been shrinking almost continuously ever since. But since the COVID-19 pandemic began in 2020, this shrinking population problem has only gotten even worse. And Russia is currently undergoing its largest peacetime decline in people ever. In all of recorded history, even worse than during the 1990s, right after the Soviet collapse. Right now, Russia has around 25 million men within the country who are of military service age. But the government knows that as time continues on, that potential pool of manpower is only going to get smaller and smaller. Therefore, it could be reasoned behind the inner walls of the Kremlin that the longer Russia waits to act upon Ukraine, the more difficult it is going to become in the future, and so the earlier, the better. Now,
so one thing I want to say, I feel like this this video is missing I feel like this video is missing the easiest point for this argument. And they just flew past it. I don't understand how could the rest of this video be so well researched and they're missing this one simple point. Ever since Crimea, the West has been funding and sending weapons to Ukraine. The longer Russia waited, the better equipped and the stronger the Ukrainian army became. That is the time pressure. Not Ukraine joining NATO, because that wasn't going to happen because of Crimea. Not population, like demographics. That shit's like that's like 50, 100 years scale. Who gives a shit? I'm talking. We've been equipping the Ukrainian army for years now and ramping it up as tensions rise. That is
masturbate and
the
I could
time
be in pain
pressure
and
on Russia.
Breathing, like spitting my lungs out.
Thank you for the follow, broad discretion. I don't understand how they could bring up like really interesting research on the energy stuff and the water, etc., and miss on this like really obvious thing. Not like on the contrary, I don't want to criticize this. This is a good video, but damn.
By occupying Crimea and by maintaining conflicts in the Donbass region
It's
of
all
eastern
connected.
Ukraine, Russia has so far succeeded in keeping Ukraine out of NATO, and by building up troops along.
Okay, so it's like you're making an argument, and there's like there's something you're trying to explain, and there's it's caused like 80% by something. And you don't talk about that cause, but you talk about the cause that's like 10% of it, and the other cause that's 10% of it. That's how I feel when he's like bringing up all those things, and sure they're true, but then he's missing the fact that we've been arming Ukraine. That also that's a much more immediate time pressure. And once again, yeah.
The border and hosting joint military exercises in Belarus, Moscow is further able to signal to Ukraine that they are in danger, which can panic investors in the Ukrainian government and damage the economy even further, and which forces Ukraine to spend even more money on their own military and defense, taking away vital cash that they could be using to further develop their own natural gas infrastructure. And of course, Russia has been fueling a war inside of Ukraine in the east now
Link
for
to video?
years,
Sure.
ever since 2014, that has greatly depleted the Ukrainian government's time, manpower, and resources. After being taken over by pro-Russian separatists following Russia's invasion and annexation of Crimea, both Donetsk and Luhansk declared their independence from Ukraine 8 years ago, and after being supported financially and militarily from Russia, have continuously been fighting a war against the Ukrainian government ever since that has already claimed the lives of more than 14,000 people. For years, most of the territory of each has been controlled by the Ukrainian government. But just a few days ago, Russia, for the first time, officially recognized both as fully independent countries separate from Ukraine and deployed their troops into each. Right now, as I made this video, it's still unclear what exactly Putin is ultimately planning for Ukraine. He may...
We kind of know that now. Sorry, let me catch up with chat while I'm pausing this. Check out this video about Snake Island. It's only 2 minutes. Sure. Historically speaking, I was fine with Russia taking Crimea. I personally disagree with that. It might sound pedantic, but it's not pedantic. There's a very simple problem I have with that. I acknowledge the reality that the Crimean people actually were we researched it like a week or two ago. The Crimean people genuinely wanted to join Russia. That is a reality. Now, the way you handle those kinds of situations where people want independence or want secession, you acknowledge that, you negotiate with them as the nation, and you try to find some way of satisfying them. It is a complicated matter. The self-determination of a subset of a country, of a region of a country, it's a complicated matter. It's not black and white. It's not like just because they want to, it should be done. But it should at least be acknowledged. However, that is not however, what happened was not that. What happened was Russia invaded. So, and I also say that because the historical argument to me, blood and soil to me is an argument that has extremely dangerous consequences. First of all, ideologically, but also is always just used as a pretext. Let's be real. It's a pretext for the real reasons things happen. In my opinion, the main reason Crimea happened was to block Ukraine out of NATO, categorically. The oil stuff is interesting, though. I'll have to think about it. Well, besides that, NATO sets a standard around political stability and considering their...
And I could be in pain and like breathing, like spitting my lungs out.
Thanks for the follow, Armand Coloma. NATO sets a standard around political stability, and considering their institutions are just weak, corruption is high. Yes. From what we've seen, that seems to be one of the main reasons there were issues with Russia joining NATO. Do you think the Pornhub ban will increase Russia fertility rates? Oh, maybe it might backfire, yeah. Without Donbass and Crimea, I doubt NATO wants to have Ukraine within NATO. Maybe. This guy has the arguments, my priorities are wacky. Oh yeah, I addressed that. Do you think Russia... I think they're just showing the strategic place of Ukraine in Europe because of its resources, ability to produce crops, etc. And that is true. Like, that's really important. Hi, I'm going to make a video in support of Ukraine. Russia attacked Ukraine for no reason. It's very bad for Ukrainians now. Can you please say, Ukraine, hold on. This is the least we can do for them. Yeah, Slava Ukraina. I'm pro-Ukraine. Hey, if you make that video, link it here. I'll watch it. Did you see the video of protests in Russia? I've seen clips of that yesterday. Yeah. Is there anything particularly new? What did the Tatar people think? I don't know. Ukraine treated Crimea like shit. They didn't invest a single dime in it. I don't know if that's true. Crimea, wasn't Crimea one of the richest parts of Ukraine? I may be wrong with that, but that's just not the impression I had. Now Russian oligarchs turned it into a great resort like those news there. That's not what this video is saying, by the way. I just want to find the DPR LPR info because supposedly they've been shelled by Ukraine. On live UA, on live UA map we don't really have. What do we have? Like right now, we have damage to civilian ability in the Kievsky neighborhood in Donetsk. Oil depot in Rovenki of Luhansk region caught fire. Yeah, that might be shelling. That might be shelling, or it might be sabotage. Who knows? Hello from Ukraine. Hello, Pixel 3i5. Hope you're safe. Hope you're doing it good. And then I missed Gehentiog's paragraph. I think it's a bit of, I'm going to tell you the real reason. The gas thing, I'm not really convinced by, since Russia already achieved their goals there through the separatists. And in the past, Russia has quite brazenly demonstrated how, for the longest time, they did not actually want the Donbas conflict to end either way, only ramping their support up whenever Ukraine pushed the separatists back, and scaling it back whenever the separatists made advances. Well, that supports my personal theory that the main issue was always NATO. Maintaining a state of conflict meant it was impossible for for Ukraine to be considered by NATO. Research it. That's the reality there. No, I don't mean right now. I mean over the last whatever years. Oh, over the last whatever years. Yeah, there's been the war, the war in Donbas and Luhansk is a real thing. Yes, and it's been happening for 8 years. Watch this. You want to see the reality in Crimea? Okay. Yes, yes, Deem. Hello, yes, Deem. I'm from Russia. I'm so sorry that we have so few protesters on the streets. People are cowards and afraid to go out. It's okay. I personally understand that. It's a tough situation. You don't live in a free country. I've seen people criticize the Russians, like, why are there so few people protesting? This might seem petty, but I struggle to imagine those people having the courage to go protest if they were in Russian shoes. Honestly, it's a bit easy to say that, but we know that not all Russians support what's happening. For Crimea, what I mean, Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine during USSR period for the good relationship between the two SSRs. Yes, and then there's the Russian strategic base of Sevastopol. Only Russian base in the warm seas. They had a buy. Okay, they had a lease to exploit the military harbor till 2040. But after Maidan, the lease was revoked. And then the people of Crimea wanting to join the Russian Federation. This is why I tend to say that taking Crimea from me is different from invading Donbas and the whole region. So I didn't know about the lease being revoked. Ukraine revoking Sevastopol lease. This article says the opposite, by the way. You see this? Russia has renounced the lease contracts with Ukraine for its Black Sea Fleet base in Sevastopol. Oh, it was after Crimea. Sorry, fuck, I didn't see the date, or there was no date. Oh, never mind. This was after Crimea got. Of course they're gonna revoke it. They don't care about the lease. Russia's claim to Crimea. Is there a legal basis for Russia's actions? The Budapest Memorandum definitely says no. But we've talked about that already. If anyone doesn't know what the Budapest Memorandum is, it was a promise from Russia to respect Ukraine's borders, and the US to respect Ukraine's borders in exchange for Ukraine getting rid of their nuclear weapons.
I could masturbate, and I could be.
Thank you for the follow, Yesteem.
And
Spasiba.
like breathing, like spitting my lungs out.
Blah blah blah. All right, let me just control F lease. Oh, okay, there's no mention of the post-Maidan government revoking the lease. This is from 2010. Ukraine extends lease for Russia's Black Sea Fleet. This might be hard to find. Do you have a link for that, Pulkar? But regardless, even if it's true, that that still isn't justification for an invasion, because that's what's happened. Okay, thank you. Let me know when you got the information. Yes, the SWIFT. Russia has been banned from the SWIFT banking system. Absolutely.
May only be plotting a limited strike into the country in order to permanently sever both Donetsk and Luhansk from the country, as he did with Crimea 8 years previously, and effectively occupy each. He may also be plotting a further limited strike from Crimea in order to neutralize the block in the canal in order to free up Crimea's struggling water supply. He may be planning to go further, though, to ensure that this situation never happens again, and push Russian territory all the way to at least some of the Dnieper River to
And that is what's happening right now.
simultaneously stabilize Crimea's geographic position by freeing up the water supply, deny even more of Ukraine's coastline.
What do you find? What do you want to find about Crimea? I was wondering. So Pulkor said that after the Maidan Revolution, they already blew up the dam. By the way, yeah, yeah, of course they did. That makes sense. That actually explains why on Live UA map there were tabs on the dam. Anyways, what we want to find out about Crimea is the claim that the lease that allowed the Russian fleet to use the port of Sevastopol was revoked by the post-Maidan Revolution Ukrainian government. I'm interested in whether that is true or not. Obviously, the lease was revoked as soon as Russia started meddling in Crimea, but was it revoked before any escalation happened? I'm curious.
Line and access to natural gas reserves, and set up a stronger potential defensive line against any attack from the west along the Dnieper River's banks. Alternatively, he may also be planning a southern takeover of Ukraine, which would simultaneously bring Donetsk and Luhansk into Russia, link up Crimea with the Dnieper River and the canal, block off Ukraine from the rest of the Black Sea, and transform the country into a landlocked state, permanently removed from any remaining offshore gas deposits, and link up mainland Russian territory with both Crimea and loyal Transnistria in the west. Or he may really be planning an all-out assault to take over the entire country, so as to guarantee that Russia and
This
the
I do not
CSTO's
believe.
defensive lines against NATO are pushed further back towards the more narrow opening of the North European plain between the Carpathian Mountains and the Baltic Sea across the border of Poland. And in so doing, guaranteeing that Ukraine will never be used against them, and that Belarus will never become an indefensible salient. From there, Russian provocations into Moldova are almost a certainty next. Another former Soviet state who isn't a member of NATO and conveniently already has a pro-Russian breakaway state that Russia will eventually get around to recognizing as well. Transnistria. It's all a part of Putin's repeatedly stated goal of bringing back the old Soviet and Russian empire for the 21st century. Now that Putin has chosen to invade, it's not entirely clear what's happening as the facts on the ground are rapidly developing. But what is clear are Putin's demands. He has demanded that the West agree to 3 main terms. 1. That Ukraine never be allowed to join the NATO alliance. 2. That NATO and the United States withdraw all of their armed forces from Eastern Europe back to the pre-1997 boundaries of NATO, ending in Germany, effectively abandoning Poland, the Baltic states, and much of the rest of Eastern Europe. And that 3. NATO and America agree to freeze the NATO alliance as is and rule out any future expansion of new members. And that the alliance
My
will not
advanced
hold any
intelligence
military
can be
drills
used like
in
an
Ukraine.
octopus to suffocate and pull apart my enemy's arguments.
Thank you for the follow, Awabik. Okay, I understand, but I cannot give you any information. It is very difficult to speak English and listen to you, especially on the topic of politics, where words are difficult for me. No problem. I appreciate you hanging out, though. I hope this stream is still interesting for you. Spasiba. Moldova doesn't have a pro-Russian president anymore. Maya Sandu got elected. Okay. They have rebellions in Russian army. Welcome to the Free Russian Army. I don't know if that's true. I have not seen information as to that effect. You can ask me anything about Moldova. They are our brothers. We speak the same language. Interesting.
Ukraine, Eastern Europe, or in the Caucasus without prior Russian consent. The West and NATO, of course, will never accept any of these terms, and Putin must know this. But through the lenses of geographic security, the economics of oil and gas, the changing climate, the shortage of water in Crimea, and Russia's own sensitive internal demographic crisis, it's clear to see what Russia's primary concerns are with Ukraine, and only time will tell how Russia and Vladimir Putin act upon those concerns. But by analyzing how Putin has acted before during times of crisis, we can likely figure out how he'll act again in the future. The recognition of both Donetsk and Luhansk as independent countries and the deployment of Russian troops into both, before launching the full-scale invasion across the entire country next, mirrors a striking, uncanny resemblance to exactly what Putin and the Russian government did against Georgia 14 years previously, back in 2008. Back then, the Russian army invaded the country of Georgia in what would ultimately become the first European war of the 21st century. Two pro-Russian breakaway provinces inside of Georgia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, were each recognized by Russia as fully separate and independent countries, and then, by using the pretext of Georgian occupation of both, Russia deployed troops into both, and from there, initiated a full-scale land, sea, and air invasion across the rest of Georgia. Across the 12 days of intense fighting that followed, the Russians occupied both Abkhazia and South Ossetia within Georgia, solidified their de facto independence, and effectively dismembered the country, displacing nearly 200,000 people and causing Georgia to sever all diplomatic relations with Russia. However, it was, in the end, a decisive victory for Russia and for Vladimir Putin, as it kept Georgia from joining NATO, and at a time when NATO and the West were more distracted by the quagmires of Iraq and Afghanistan, there was little international attention, let alone condemnation. It would only be less than 6 years later when Putin would deploy the exact same kinds of tactics that he used against Georgia, against Ukraine, in Crimea, and the Donbass. And now in 2022, it once again appears that history is repeating itself in Donetsk, Luhansk, and Ukraine. Without a doubt, the Russian invasion of Georgia is absolutely critical to understanding how Putin's modern military strategy of dismemberment works, and in understanding what he might ultimately plan to do with Ukraine. But unfortunately, if I made a video about it on YouTube, it's a guarantee that it would get demonetized and age restricted, and as a result, there's simply no way that you would ever see it. So instead, I created yet another full-length companion video to this one in my ongoing Modern Conflict series that's about the
what about
the
demonetization?
Russian invasion of Georgia is absolutely critical to understanding how Putin's modern military strategy of dismemberment works, and in understanding what he might ultimately plan to do with Ukraine. But unfortunately, if I made a video about it on YouTube, it's a guarantee that it would get demonetized and age restricted, and as a result, there's simply no way that you would ever see it. So instead, I created yet another full-length companion video to this one in my ongoing Modern Conflict series that's about the exact same length as this video was, that covers the entire course of the Russian invasion of Georgia from beginning to end, and uploaded it directly to Nebula, which, as you've probably heard by now, is home to
Okay. Let me catch up. And I understand what he's saying. He's basically saying that it was really brutal in Georgia, and it would get demonetized, etc. Are you even Eastern European if you have not had meat-stuffed roasted peppers? They have that in Western Europe too. At least I know France has meat-stuffed roasted peppers as a dish. But yes, that's delicious. Oh, with Sophie we had stuffed courgette. Courgette is what? Zucchini. Stuffed zucchini. Oh no, I'm confusing with zucchini. Yeah. In France, what they do is they like the meat stuffed zucchini. The stuffed peppers is more Eastern European. Actually, yeah, that's true. Stuffed zucchini is really good though. I must insist. Stuffed bell peppers are a thing here. Yeah, I made stuffed peppers a few days ago. Nice. Elden Ring soon, right? Yeah. I need to. There's some more Ukraine stuff to cover before Elden Ring. Okay, it's not for right away. Okay, I found the information that Russia had become increasingly concerned that its future access might be compromised, but nothing saying it was revoked after Euromaidan. Okay, and this is consistent with the other article we found, right? The only article we found here is that Russia renounced the lease after Crimea, which means the lease still existed. That means the lease still existed. Very difficult to understand speech in real time. I mean, no worries. Did Russia treat Crimea better than Ukraine? From what I heard, Russian oligarchs turned it into a great resort like it used to be during the USSR. And do you have any education in politics or just a moron on the internet waffling in his bedroom? I hope it's not the latter. No, I prefer waffling in your mom's bedroom. Elon Musk, Starlink service is now active in Ukraine. Good one. Dang, never heard of stuffed zucchini. I'll have to try it sometime. It's good. Crimea was the same tourist destination both in Ukraine and in Russia. The only thing that it became easier for Russians to go to Crimea for vacation because they didn't have to go to another country. But tourism in Crimea has become several times more expensive after it was annexed by Russia. Okay. Give this guy VIP. Just a clueless moron thought so. You people have no right to speak on Ukraine matters. You don't even know what I'm talking about. How long have you been listening? We sit in fear here in Ukraine while you Westerners run amok on the internet. I understand that that is pissing you off. I actually genuinely sympathize with that. But you also understand that what's happening in Ukraine is an international crisis. So yes, we do care about what's happening and we want to know about it and understand it. And if for what it matters, I am pro-Ukraine in this crisis. He hasn't monetized this channel. Yeah, that's also true. This channel is not even monetized. That being said, that's not what UL Plays is criticizing me for. Hey, how's it looking? Thanks again for that raid last night. No worries. Hey, Lexi. Oh yeah, shit. Yeah. Hey, no worries for the raid. Hope you had a good stream. I don't really know you, honestly. I was just covering Ukraine and wanted to like pass the people on to someone who was covering it. So I picked a random channel that was covering it. That was English speaking. So it was you. But hey, nice to meet you. It was long and stressful, of course, with the situation, but it was good. Thanks, man. No worries. Hope to see you around. That comment really annoyed me. I simply asked for some substance to your stream. I'm looking for a place to be informed and understand opinions outside of Ukraine. All right, fair enough. I apologize for it, you all plays. I've had a lot of people come in and troll me. And because of that, when I saw your comment, you have to understand, your first comment, which is, do you have any education in politics or are just a moron on the internet waffling in his bedroom? You have to understand that when I read that, I do assume that you are a troll. I did not think you were actually looking to have a discussion. Yeah. So I'm sorry for responding offensively, but I'm not. I didn't start it, okay? Shit, I missed a bunch of messages. Blah blah blah. Milton Katana, you have a degree in politics and international studies? I did not know that. Actually, stuffed cabbage is better than stuffed zucchini. At least in Brittany, we eat more cabbage. Oh, we have that dish in Poland, and it's a famous dish in Eastern Europe as well. In Poland, we call it gołąbki. In I have a Serbian chatter. There they call it Oh god, it's escaped in my mind. But they have that too, stuffed cabbage. Name is really decent compared to other streamers covering this topic. I hope so. I try. In fact, Russia has always been good to both Crimea and Ukraine, but Putin is fucked up and doesn't care about both Russian citizens and Ukraine. And the problem is that most Russians have a good attitude towards Ukraine. My friends and I have many relatives from Ukraine, but everyone is afraid to protest because of the repression. That is my understanding as well. That Ukrainians and Russians, for the most part, see each other as brotherly neighbors. Americans aren't really doing this entire thing justice. They don't have the same historical knowledge as the rest of us, nor the info on the nuances of European geopolitics. That is true. I have seen such bad ideas. I have seen such terrible takes on the situation ever since this started. It's appalling. And it's really shocking what terrible opinions people have been able to form about it. We live in an internet age, yeah. Come on, guys, let's spread positivity. True. Positive. I'm so tired of people sitting and divulging nonsense for views. I listen in and hope you prove me right. All right, I hope you enjoyed the stream. That's all I can hope for. There are literally reporters on the ground right now in Ukraine. What's your thoughts on that? They are risking their lives to cover a historical event. I have the utmost respect for them. Yo plays, you should do something better for your mental health and listen to people you don't like. That would go for everyone. I'm trying to find an unbiased source. Right now I find Twitch is best for that. Every news source is funded by governments. Divulging nonsense for views is not what we're doing here. Depends. If someone disagrees with me, then they'll think I'm saying nonsense. I have two men. I have two men. Leave Ukraine. I have two men. Leave Ukraine to Russia. It doesn't matter. He'll stop after Ukraine. You fucking want man. Okay, this is actually something that I actually disagree with. I don't agree with the idea of like leave Ukraine to Russia. It doesn't matter. That's really stupid. And I have seen that take. Yeah. He'll stop after Ukraine. For now, maybe you have a counter argumented, but for now, I genuinely believe so, for the simple reason that NATO is a huge red line, and I don't think Russia is ready to cross it. If Russia does anything in the Baltic states, in Poland, Romania, any other, Moldova could happen. Yes, Moldova is not protected. Moldova could happen after Ukraine, but once after that, there is no further avenue. Even in the north, I've seen people talk about Finland. Finland is not, and Sweden, obviously, because they wanted to apply to NATO. One thing, of course, it's not the same protection as NATO, but Sweden and Finland, I've seen many people not realize that under their EU membership, in the Lisbon Treaty, there is a mutual defense clause. So declaring war on Finland or Sweden means the entirety of Europe becomes your enemy, which means the European Union, sorry, which specifically means, admittedly, it's not NATO, but among the European Union, there is, for example, France, which has mutually assured destruction capabilities. It's a take that infuriates me. He absolutely won't. Putin has a history of loudly exclaiming his desire to recreate the Russian Empire and trying to become Putin the Great. Well, he's a bit more subtle about it than that. He wants to be the next Ivan the Terrible. It's likely he'll move for Moldova and the offshore Swedish and Finnish islands in the Baltic Sea. So Moldova, yes, but I don't think they aren't in NATO, EU. Yes, but they are EU members. What I'm saying is EU has a defensive pact. It's not as strong as the NATO defensive pact, and it doesn't have the EU defensive pact does not have bases in EU member states the same way NATO does. But it is Moldova. No, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm talking about Finland and Sweden, Andrew. So yes, Moldova is at risk, especially since you said they elected a president that's favorable to the West. So very likely so absolutely yes. Once Russia has deposed the Ukrainian government and replaced it with a puppet state, it's very likely that they could look at Moldova. But I genuinely doubt that Sweden and Finland are at risk, at the way some people have been saying. Even if they don't join NATO. That being said, if they truly want to join NATO, I also believe maybe now is the best time to join NATO, for the simple reason that Russia would be insane to wage war on two fronts. I have been trying to better understand the Kremlin. How is war decided in the Kremlin? Is it simply Putin, or does it go before a house? It's an autocracy. Putin and his closest leadership make all the decisions. The rest of the government is just theater. Yeah, the Kremlin is for administration and for show, like Lexibat said. Russia is an autocracy, especially Transnistria, since they are pro-Russian. Yes, definitely. So Putin might invoke the same argument to free Russian-speaking Russian people. Yeah, the blood and soil argument is terrible.